Jazakallah khair for all of you for showing up, inshallah. My name is Imam Ahmad. I am new to Atlanta. Hopefully you get to see me more, inshallah. We have Imam Tom over here who has traveled and hasn't taken a break since 3 a.m. in the morning. So he needs a lot of good coffee, inshallah. We got him that.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. A lot of you may know Imam Tom from Yaqeen. He does a lot of work with that. He lives in this small town called Utica. Is it small?
It's small.
How small?
There's no traffic.
There's no traffic. Okay, that's small. Yeah, in our car it showed 5 miles in like 43 minutes. And I was just like, what? That's like Atlanta traffic. Then now you know real Atlanta traffic. I mean, Toronto's not this bad where I'm from. So inshallah, today we're going to be talking about Islam and modernity or modernism. And again, the format for tonight, inshallah, is going to be that there's a set of questions I'll ask him. We'll jump into those conversations back and forth. We want to make this interactive. So the first maybe 35, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, we want to build on those questions that come, write them down or jot them on your note or something, and then, we'll open it up. Apparently there is this QR code at the back. Thank you so much for doing that. So you can also start dropping in your anonymous Q&As over there, and feel free to do that. Second part of this is I just want us to lay the foundation of intentions. So the entire purpose of these conversations is to help all of you as you're going through university to think. So there might be things that you may hold on to very dearly and you believe into them today, right? And I'll tell you this from experience. When I was in university, there were things I believed in. Today I look back and I'm like, man, how could I be so naive to believe in that? Right? So once you hit 40, something happens in your brain, right? Once you hit 30, something happens. So the purpose is to push those so that many of you won't have to wait till 40 to get to that realization. And sometimes if you allow an alternate view of a particular thing that you're accustomed to, or a belief system or something, then it allows you to grow. Right? So the purpose would be that if something is said over here, right, you might feel like completely against it. Take it home, sit down with it rather than reacting to it, because you may express your opinion. You may say, you know what, I disagree with that, and that is absolutely perfectly fine. I was going to say he disagrees, but anyhow, I think we'll give him some slack. Yeah, Husn al-Dhan, he probably has something to do. So coming back, so intentions are very important in this particular conversation, inshallah. And hopefully we can have a lot more open Q&As and stuff like that. I do want to get some of you closer. I know like the sisters are good, but the brothers, way up there. You have 1, 2, 3, look at that brother, mashallah. He's like, I'll be the Spider-Man.
Like, I know I come from New York, but don't hold that against me. You can come closer.
Yeah. Okay, all right, let's begin, inshallah. Jameel. So, it's a flowing conversation. So let's set, very important for us to set a definition for that, something, right? Like we cannot begin a conversation. We all need to be in this. So, let's take this right now. What is modernity or modernism to one of you over here? What do you think it is? Throw it out. What do you think modernism is? Assimilation. Assimilation, great. What do you think modernism is? Customs of a modern world, right? Okay, great. Give me another one, somebody. Sorry? The current culture. Okay, so we're all on different pages. So when we talk about something, if we're not on the same page of what we actually mean by that word, then we may walk away with a completely different understanding. So the purpose is let's level set and see when I or Imam Tom, where we're using the word modernism or modernity, what does it entail? I'll let you answer.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu rasulillah. Yeah, just to echo and further Imam Ahmad's point, I came to Islam when I was in your shoes. Okay, so I was at an undergrad at a very liberal arts college in New York called Vassar College. Maybe some of you have heard of it. That's where I did my undergrad. One of the most left-leaning institutions in the country, so much so that Westboro Baptist Church actually protested Vassar College. right? And I came in when I was a freshman. I was an atheist. I was an anarchist. I was involved in a lot of anti-IMF and World Bank protests. Definitely got, involved in some interesting direct action activities. But I came to Islam through a willingness to question everything. All right. So I know maybe sometimes when you grow up, as a Muslim or in a Muslim family, in a Muslim community, you're not accustomed to questioning things or being encouraged to question things. And I want you to know that my MO is the complete opposite of that for me. And I still am involved in education. I teach middle schoolers. I do a lot of different things. And I'm always pushing them to question. We don't get anywhere by playing like Sunday school answers, right? Like we all know what the right answer is. And so we're just, saving face or presenting a certain face. If you've got a doubt, it's better that you address that doubt and seriously put everything on the table and go into the history of ideas and your thoughts and your sensibilities. Then you just kind of put it in your back pocket and tuck it away till 10 years from now. And then it actually metastasizes and becomes a much bigger problem. So when it comes to the Q&A and the Slido, when I say like it's no holds barred, like there's like literally nothing that's off topic, like literally there is nothing that is off the table when it comes to anything, like anything. So please take me at my word when it comes to that. Understanding modernity is a really, really important thing. And as we're going to figure out, it's partly so important to figure out because it is so slippery to define. When we go around the room and we talk about different sorts of conceptions, everyone might have a different answer. And that shows you something about any ideology or concept, that it is normal and normative. It means that if you're a fish, this is the water that you swim in, okay? And that means that it's the hardest to detect and it's the hardest to critique, because it's something that is so subconsciously is the backdrop of everything that we do and ingest and indulge in, that it evades sort of that critical eye.
Why is it subconscious? Like, if you can elaborate on that. Like, why are we not able to? You talked about that it being subtle and like,
yeah, I mean,
kind of like Riya.
Definitely.
Right,
well, I'll get there, but I think, when it comes to understanding, and we have a future talk that's going to be about liberalism. And if you want to understand what liberalism is, we're talking like not like just like left and right. We're talking like liberalism from the 18th century onwards. It's all about autonomy. And autonomy is all about sort of pushing the limits and finding what is the horizon and then pushing it or rebelling against it. Or let's say, making one's value in pushing against some sort of limit that wasn't chosen, okay? So you have to ask yourself, well, why hasn't liberalism pushed against this particular limit? Okay, so that's one of the reasons why it is, it's hidden and in the background. There's a really important, so I want to just take a second to get down on this idea of what modernity actually is. There was a former US Air Force general. His name was Curtis LeMay. He fought in the Vietnam War. And he wrote a memoir in 1968 about his experiences. And he was talking about the Viet Cong. And he said that we should have, quote, bombed them back to the Stone Age. Now, this is a very, very famous sort of quote. And it was actually reportedly used again by Richard Armitage addressing the late Pervez Musharraf of Pakistan, when basically the United States in the wake of 9/11 was threatening Pakistan with some sort of military action if they didn't cooperate fully. And supposedly he also used this phrase again, bomb you back to the Stone Age. And I usually use this phrase to demonstrate what modernity is, because if modernity was simply what we're doing now, right, 2023, then this statement would make no sense, because the statement implies that you can take somebody who lives in 2023 and somehow do some sort of violence upon them and bring them back to a previous era, right? That's the implicit understanding of what this person said. If it's possible to bomb someone back to the Stone Age, the understanding of time hidden, implicit in that statement is that modernity is not about the calendar date, right? It's about something else. Now, some people think that it's merely about technology, but I would push back against that and say, no, well, that's not the case either, because if you've traveled a little bit, you know that some places in the world in 2023 are much more technologically advanced than even the United States or even places in Europe. When we were students in Saudi Arabia, if you got you know, there were, let's say, asymmetrical sort of technological advances, but if you got a speeding ticket, you would get a text message on your phone, you could pay it on your phone, and you'd be done. No going to the DMV, no standing in court, no all this sort of, you know, draconian stuff that we do here. And yet, nobody would be willing to grant Saudi Arabia entrance into the upper echelons of modernity. It is considered in the pecking order of what is sort of an iconically modern place, definitely not anywhere at the top.
Yeah, I mean, Arab world in general right now with e-government, they are like way ahead of the Western world today.
In technology, right? In technology and the integration.
E-government in
exactly.
specific. Yeah.
And so even when Qatar hosted the World Cup recently, you have skyscrapers, you have clean streets, et cetera, et cetera. You have unparalleled technology that hasn't even hit the streets in the States. And yet, because they ban the sale of alcohol, because they don't fly rainbow flags, right? They are not granted access into the upper echelons of modernity. That's not a place where you would look or expect to find them. So then what does that tell us implicitly about what modernity is? Modernity is neither a calendar date, nor is it simply sort of the accumulation of technology. It is a group of values. It is a certain group of values. And that group of values is hegemonic. You know what hegemonic means, obviously, we're all in undergrad. Hegemonic means that people are trying to impose it in other places on the earth. This isn't something that's a buffet. You don't get to go to the table of values, the buffet of values, and say, well, I'm going to choose liberalism. You know, I actually prefer the Sharia, or I prefer Islam, or I prefer this other thing. No, there's bombs and guns and dollars and aid and whatever that backs up certain values. And then there's other values that are on the butt side, on the barrel side of the gun, so to speak. So once we realize that modernity is about a constellation of values or a group of values, and that this group of values is being imposed, we can now define what's modernism as people that are advocates of this particular group of values and are actually trying to impose it upon the rest of the world. Now, people who are modernists, what's sort of the anatomy of modernity or modernism, people who support the modern age or this group of values, they would tell the narrative that we live in the best of all worlds and that we're consistently progressing to ever greater things, right? Modernity in the modern world is responsible for modern medicine, modern advances in technology. We live longer. We live more safely, right? We have left behind the barbarism of pre-gone ages, and we've now been admitted into peaceful coexistence, discussion, rationality, all these sorts of things. And my key thing that I would like you all to consider is that this is a triumphalist history that doesn't take into account all of the facts. And if we want to understand Islam's place in the modern world, we have to have a more critical understanding of the modern world and of modernity than simply what modernists tell us it is, right? You all are critical enough, I think, of the United States and its foreign policy to understand that the story that the United States, the official line that it tells about its own history, is not to be taken at face value, right? Plymouth Rock to freedom for all to et cetera, it's a nice story, but it elides and covers up a lot of very nasty stuff under the bottom, such as the dispossession of Native American indigenous peoples, such as the enforced enslavement of African peoples and the tremendous amounts of wealth that it has built for itself on the backs of those enslaved peoples, right? This is something that does not fit squarely within the narrative, the nationalist narrative of the American state. Well, modernity is the same thing. Modernity has its own narrative. Back in the day, life was nasty, brutish, and short. People were dying at 30 from these diseases and those diseases, and there was violence spread everywhere. But there are other things that make us, that force us to confront this narrative and actually point out that it's not that simple. Okay, so what's the true story of modernity rather than the myth and the fairy tale? Modernity is a hegemonic product, a hegemonic ideological and political project. It advertises or advances particular values, particular ways of looking at and experiencing the world that it seeks to enshrine, and it seeks to displace and unseat and marginalize other values and other ways, even exterminate other ways of looking at the world. A more critical assessment of modernity is that would tell a different story, that modernity is the structural abandonment of morality. That modernity is the structural abandonment of morality.
Can we define morality here, because we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page of what morality
Let's do it. Well,
because then we can agree on what abandonment entails.
it depends on how deep we want to go into it. In the history of philosophy, right, there was one thing that happened in the history in Western philosophy, which is what they call the is-ought distinction, or the separation of fact and value, right? There became this sort of idea that you could describe things objectively somehow without any sort of, moral judgment on it, right? The sky is blue, etc. So the thought went. But this was actually quite a revolution in philosophy, because before then, people in pre-modern societies, they had a sort of epistemology that recognized that even knowledge itself was a moral act. And this is actually found in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima alamtana wa zidna ilman ya Rabbil Alameen, is that when we ask for knowledge, we don't just ask for any knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ taught us to ask for beneficial knowledge, which is an implicit recognition that some knowledge is not beneficial. And then even with the beneficial knowledge that you have, there's an implicit recognition that you can use it for evil. Right? And then after that, we ask for increase, right? So quality over quantity. But there's been a departure within Western philosophy from this to the assumption that knowledge in and of itself does not have any moral value, that you can just know things. And that's how you get the phenomenon of someone who has an Islamic studies PhD and studies the Quran and all of its ahruf, and they're not a Muslim, which is something that we experience in the Western Academy. The separation between fact and value, between is and ought, creates the possibility of that existing. Somebody from a bygone era would say, that's impossible. How could you study the Quran? How could you study Islam so much just to know about it? What's the purpose of knowing anything if it's not to be put to a moral end, or a moral sort of...
There's no call to action.
There's no call to action. It's supposedly just neutral. And this is actually, this is off topic, but it is actually part of the, also the epistemic, or what's the fancy word, is the epistemic genocide against native peoples and indigenous peoples in the Americas as well. This type of move to separate, to pretend that knowledge is just simply a neutral thing that you can just accumulate and have no sort of consequences of it.
So do you think they've completely, like modernism completely abandons morality?
No. But structurally, well, this is the point where I say that modernity is the structural abandonment of morality, because it doesn't mean that there's no place for morality within the modern world, but it means that it has been structurally marginalized. What does that mean? It means that the government doesn't really care about making you a good person. Okay, that's not their job. In fact, if you look at sort of the vices, we see the government lining up to take part and be the peddler or the pimp of the vice economy when it comes to the legalization of marijuana and hard drugs, when it comes to the lottery, and when it comes to the explosion of sports betting. Boy, we wonder why all these college athletes now are getting in trouble for betting on games. And I wonder how that could have happened. Maybe because you legalized gambling and made it super easy for everyone to do, right? The government is at the forefront of benefiting financially from vice. That is a demonstration of how it has
controlled vice.
Yes, supposedly controlled,
right,
really just sort of opportunistically capitalizing
and controlled vice,
on vice. But this is a demonstration of how the government doesn't care in a structural way whether you're a good human being or not, or a moral human being or not. They care that you are a productive citizen. They care that you obey the law, but they don't care if you're good. That's your private matter. According to modernity, that's your private issue. You can take care of that at home. You can take care of that in your church or in your mosque. But the government's not going to butt in any sort of way. So morality's there, but it's structurally marginalized. And when we say structural, we mean that it's not just one party. This is not something that's a partisan issue. It's not Democrat, Republican. It's not liberal, conservative. It's not left or right. This is in the water and it's in the air. It's everywhere around us. So what has been the consequence of this sort of configuration of society? Because society wasn't always like this, right? People and other sort of orders and other ways of configuring society took much more seriously the importance and significance of being a moral person first. Well, I would like to say that if you look at the CV or the resume of modernity, there are some staggering sort of failures that break up the narrative of the triumphalist sort of history that we live in the best of times. If the modernist would like to tell us that we've now reached the era of ease and we've saved ourselves from calamity and shortage, etc.,
disease and all that.
Exactly. Then I would simply point out that our hardships now are more man-made than they are natural. So if you look at food, for example, we've gone from famines that maybe were naturally occurring to man-made food deserts, right, in the urban centers. We've gone from those sort of, again, natural causes or natural shortages to starvation caused by political sanctions, right? When Madeleine Albright was asked in the 90s if 500,000 Iraqi children were worth it for the sanctions that the United States was imposing on Iraq, she said yes, absolutely. So this is supposedly the best of all possible worlds and progressive morality. This is the modern world.
It ties back to the point that you mentioned earlier, which is that, structural removal of morality. One of the consequences of that is also you've removed the entire concept of somebody, a human being having a soul, right? So that you can get an answer like that, which is like, we kill 500 people for X amount of sanctions, and there's this disconnection from the decision and the consequence of that decision.
What's considered real is the material. And this is part of secularism, which is not technically the topic of our talk, so we won't necessarily get into it. But who gets to decide what the real human being is, right? Again, it's not that the soul is completely gone, it's just something that's been privatized. You can talk about the soul, you can believe in a soul, no one's going to stop you from believing in a soul. This isn't communism. But when it comes to the calculus of the state and the calculus of the society, we're going to act as if the soul doesn't exist, because that's something that's a private sort of affair. So food, okay, so we went from natural disasters to man-made disasters when it came to food. Warfare is the same. Now, it's true that in pre-modern societies, they lived in a state of permanent war. You assumed that the other side or any sort of other nation or empire was at war with you. And yet, the amount of damage that you could do was significantly limited by sort of the efficacy of weapons, right? People were swinging clubs and swords and things like that. And so they're inherently limited by the number of people you have holding swords and the strength of the arm. Now we have left the default state of war. We have the UN, we have sort of different international treaties, the Geneva Conventions, the ICC, but we have an endless state of proxy war. We also have weapons that are far more evil: nerve gas, depleted uranium bullets, napalm. Consider that napalm, again, to make it full circle with the Vietnam War and how evil the United States' foreign policy and warfaring has been over the past 100 or 200 years. Napalm is actually chemically designed by human beings to stick to the skin so that the fire continues to burn on the skin for as long as possible. Now, if that isn't a demonstration of the structural abandonment of morality, I don't know what is. Of course, the crowning achievement of the modern age is nuclear warfare. And there's nothing more representative, I don't think, of the modern world than the ability to wipe out the entire Earth's populace with the press of a single button. So again, we've gone from, perhaps life was nasty and brutish and short, according to the modernists, but we live on the perpetual brink of annihilation in the modern world, the best of all possible worlds, so to speak.
How's that impacting us socially?
Well, socially, we live on, there's a paranoia that sets in from, just this sort of, and many people have captured the sort of sentiments in writing. When you have such destruction that could so quickly and senselessly be wrought upon people, in the 50s, they used to have those drills, right? Where it's like you hide under your desk and you crouch, the duck and cover drills.
The sirens going off.
Yeah, and then after Columbine, it was like the active shooter drills. And I don't know if you guys still do active shooter drills at Georgia Tech or anything like that. But, it's a state of paranoia. So again, we would like to question the triumphalist history of modernity as progressive peace and progressive sort of the march of history. Things get worse if we look towards social fracturing and the disintegration of the family. Okay, we have maybe three things we can focus on here. We can look at intergenerational issues, we can look at intra-generational issues, and then finally spousal issues, which will probably be of interest to all of you. Intergenerational issues that have worsened in modernity or are part of modernity's resume. The young don't feel the need or duty to learn from the elders anymore. And that's not entirely their fault. We'll get there. But part of this is we have an ideal of progress. The parents, they're part of the past. Your grandparents are part of the Stone Age that you don't want to be bombed back into. And so they don't really represent anything that you would really want to learn from, except for maybe a few curios here and there. We also are drilled with individualism and self-determination. And so we experience the idea, the peak adulthood is that moment of moving out, right, of independence, which is a very, very new thing. And it happens to play into the government's policies of wanting, everybody to own a home and taxable incomes and debt slavery and these sorts of things. And there are older ways of doing it, right? Like in the pre-modern era, families sort of existed almost as a corporation, right? And so, and you still see that. We're still close enough to many of us in the Muslim community, to our immigrated family members, where, we know that they used to work like this. The oldest sibling goes and gets the education, and, everybody sort of pools resources and sticks together. This is a different way of doing things. That's not the way that modernity wants you to do things, especially the liberal nation state. They want you to think in individualistic terms, and furthering your career and your individual life, and et cetera, et cetera.
And how do they benefit from that, right? Because there's a clear benefit.
How does the government benefit from that?
No. Promoting individualism and this peak sense of, I want to live my life alone, or I want to be left alone for 10 years and then I can figure things out later.
Yeah, well.
And how are they benefiting from that?
When it comes to the number of mortgages, exactly, that are going on in the economy, and the amount of taxable income. Remember when Obama said to the King of Saudi Arabia, "You're never going to get ahead with half of your workforce at home." He was referring to women, right? This was a very, very sort of revealing statement of the logic and calculus of the nation state, which basically does not. And we're not talking about individual choice, whether you're more fulfilled by a career or not. But we're talking about the liberal nation state is not neutral in that choice. It has a strong preference for your choice and which one you decide. And from a very early age, it's trying to sell you that vision and make you invest your self-worth into that vision. But it's not just the fault of the youth. The old are affected by modernity as well. The old have less and less to teach us. Their experiences are often just limited to their own individual lives, and they're no longer the conduits of tradition, but rather the conduits of cultural imperialism. That's intergenerational. Yeah.
Do you think that? So you touched on this thing. So a lot of the older generation, they also have a lot of they don't have values, or if they have values, they're all cultural based. And do you think that the reason why the younger generation is not interacting with that older generation right now is also something related to that, because they don't have something tangible to give in the first place? But more importantly, the older generation themselves, they're only pushing culture.
Yeah, it's push-pull, it's both, right? And so it's sort of like feeds off of each other. But even worse than just culture, the source of that culture is often derivative and a colonized culture.
Colonized culture.
So,
or Hindu culture.
Gora,
Pakistani.
Gora.
Gora, or actually Gora, or for Desis, it's our Hindu culture, right? Like I was reading something today about tax code in Pakistan, and they have something called HUF.
We're talking about colorism and racism, by the way, for those who don't speak Urdu. Like colorism and racism is an extremely prevalent part, unfortunately, in Muslim culture, and even the culture of our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation. Does this come indigenously from them? Or it certainly doesn't come from Islam. A lot of this stuff comes from their history of colonization. So that's what I'm talking about when our elders are not always a valid conduit of tradition anymore. Sometimes they're a conduit of something that is a derivative or an imposed history upon us.
So I was reading something about something called HUF. Who knows what HUF stands for? So in the Pakistani tax code, it says that there's something called HUF, which is a Hindu Unified Families, or Hindu United Families, which was a way for Hindus to evade taxes of the Goras, of the white people. And it's really interesting because we bought it wholesale. And now what has happened is, the entire joint family system that is taking place in the Desi culture has everything to do with, it has nothing to do with Islam. It has everything to do with Hindu practices that have, at wholesale, we've adopted them, and we don't even question that. We don't question that at all. And now, mashallah, we're all living under the one roof. We're all Muslims, and we're not even united within that roof. Right? And where did that come from? It came from, right? It came from somewhere. The colonizers pushed it down, or it came from a consequence of us trying to evade some form of colonizers' policies or something that was taking place in India, Pakistan, or any other country such as African countries, right? And I think that's where a lot of this is also stemming from.
Yeah, so those are just some of the intra-generational issues. In the intergenerational issues, modernity also has exacerbated intra-generational issues. Siblings experience less duty towards one another. They tend to live further apart than they used to. And they tend to not support each other in times of crisis, like they are called to in other traditions, such as Islam.
Did you ever see this in Saudi when you were studying, where if the older sibling walks in, the younger sibling goes and kisses the
Always.
forehead of
Always.
the older sibling?
Yeah, always.
Right?
I mean,
Abdullah, you need to do that with Husna, but that's a different story. But it's so embedded in their culture that this is my older brother. They will get up because my older brother's entered. They would kiss his forehead, that you're my older brother. I was like, what happened?
Yeah, exactly. So modernity has eroded a lot of that. And again, that sort of idea of the family corporation, of everybody pooling and everybody having a role to play and everybody sort of depending upon each other. So we reached, this sort of stage of history, 2023, and we look at the Quran and we look at the inheritance laws and we're like, wait a second, how come a brother gets twice as much as his own sister? And then we realize that it's not the Sharia that should be questioned, but rather our sensibilities of individualism that expect sort of a very cold business-like relationship between siblings, as opposed to a relationship of mutual support that goes back much further, right? If you imagine the brother flying in from New York and the sister flying in from San Francisco and them just collecting their lump sum of money and going their separate ways, then the Sharia seems barbaric. But that's not the normative family within the Sharia. That's not what a family or a sibling relationship is supposed to look like in the first place, right? It's supposed to be thicker than that. It's supposed to be more codependent than that. We hate codependence because we're individualistic, but some codependence is good for us.
On that point, I think that's a really interesting point because it comes up a lot. Inheritance and stuff, and modernism is better because we have more fairer laws of inheritance and stuff like that. But if you really think about it, if a woman gets, like, as the Quran says, 2-1, right? مثل حظ الأنثيين. Like, so if, two sisters, their share is going to be equal to one brother. The two sisters don't have to share or expend or expense or spend any of that they get in inheritance on anybody within the family except themselves. But if the brother gets that double share, and if you as a sister are in need, he is obligated in Sharia to spend on you, right? So the obligation of spending is on him. For you is your own money, and to you is your money. You have nothing to do. Like, he's like, hey man, bro, you need to give me. I know I got money, but you need to give me because Sharia obligates you. So there's an entire mechanism that has been completely removed as part of this individualist.
Yeah. It's also sort of a capitalist logic of fungibility, right? Understand like a fungible token is something that is identical and substitutable with every other one, right? I think that, pre-modern societies and specifically, the Sharia, teaches that we are not fungible, okay? We have different roles and responsibilities, and privilege is always commensurate with duty, right? Yeah. An increase of a privilege of one type is an increase in duty. But it's all together as a holistic whole. It's not value, right? It's not one is better than another. It's just some people have more duty than others. Anyway, I mean, so we have intergenerational and intragenerational sort of fraying and fracturing, which has been exacerbated by modernity. And then finally, spousal issues. Okay, so
the fun stuff.
Yeah, the fun stuff. So we have, obviously feminism and red pill duking it out, in the culture wars. We have, a very sort of purposeless antagonism between men and women. I have never seen so much resentment and spite from males towards females or females towards males. Something that I call a gender secessionism. If you imagine that, I think the Sharia calls us to be invested in the success of the opposite sex. As men, the Sharia and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be invested in the success of women, and women to be invested in the success of men. And the current culture wars ask us to actually divest from the other, right? To actually separate and say, I'm just going to do me.
Or your success is my failure.
Or even that. Yeah. So we've talked about sort of, scarcity issues, like issues of economy and resources. We've talked about the social fragmentation. And this is, again, modernity's CV, which I hope that by now you sort of are questioning the triumphalist narrative if you haven't already. And then the last one is actually, I think, the most significant and immediate, which is the ecocide, the environmental degradation that we live or are being killed in. We have microplastics that are populating the world, the accumulation and the ingestion of which are making us sicker and sicker. They're in your cosmetics, they're in your food packaging, they're in your clothing, right? 35% come from our clothing due to the erosion of synthetic materials such as polyester, acrylics, nylon-based clothing, often during the washing process when we put them in the spin cycle. Those are just the microplastics. We have bigger plastics too, macroplastics, right? You guys have heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch?
Yeah.
Anybody hear of that? Raise your hand if you've heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. How big is it? There's two actually. They just call it one. How big is it? Pretty damn big. Okay, it's twice the size of Texas. Twice the size of Texas. Okay. We are inundated with endocrine disruptors, BPA, DDT, phthalates that disrupt our hormones and throw us out of balance. Pesticides and fertilizers, monocrops, GMOs. Actually, fun fact, I used to work on organic farms, so I know quite a bit about this. They are literally changing our body chemistry. They are making us sick, making us miserable, making us sort of having these behavioral affects. So the question that I would like to pose to anybody who is a modernist would be, is this really progress? Okay, do we really live in the best of all possible worlds? Have we been inevitably marching on and on towards better and better and better as society? And is this inevitable, right? What's our theory of history? Does history just simply unfold in an inevitable way such that this is the way that it had to be?
Don't you find it that it's really interesting that they parse this information, like so they apply modernism or modernity to things that they really hold dear, and so they'll apply all of these eco-friendly rules as part of modern societies. But then you'll have all these people that are doing all these protests, they're blocking those roads and stuff, and then you'll see that they'll have like iPhone 14, and they're actually being one of you're consuming a new phone every single, and there's no need for that. Right? So the consumption of products. And what's really interesting is when I was in Pakistan, my brother-in-law's car battery died. What do we do when a car battery dies? Replace it. What do you do? So you go to whatever, they're like, oh, we'll toss this one away. We went to this guy who was sitting there off the street in Pakistan. The guy took out the battery, he dumped the acid, he was wearing this thing, he cleaned up the plates, he put the new zinc plates, he put the battery in there and added new fluid, and the battery was new. Right? Back in the day, many of you are too young for this, but I remember growing up having repair shops.
You used to fix shoes.
You used to fix shoes. You used to fix your television. Your television will break down. You don't go and buy a new television. You would take your television to a repair shop and get it fixed. Now what has happened with modernism is that they've got us all in this accumulation. And then they are creating this facade that, this modernistic world, we're going to create an eco world for you. You guys are the best generation ever. You've never had any problems.
This is progress.
This is progress.
Progress is being able to dispose recklessly until it kills you.
Subhanallah. And I'll tell you what happens to our disposal. So I'm part of a project in South Africa with, if you know Sheikh Bilal Ismail, in IDP, so Imam Development Project. We have over 400 imams. All these phones that we dispose off of, there's an entire industry, and it's not by design. So they all somehow make it in the black market to South Africa for the poorer countries, and that's Samsung S6 and S7. What are we at right now? S what? S14? S23, okay, perfect. S23. So that's iPhone 14. Okay, alhamdulillah. She's got the right aqidah. She's got the right aqidah. People with Androids, I've been talking to Imam Tom about it, but that conversations is yeah, maybe we'll be able to convince you over, inshallah. Yeah, but that's the really interesting thing, right? On one hand, we're the key cause of consumption and pollution, but yet we'll be out there blocking buses and saying, oh my God, you're causing, this gas is causing damage. But yet I want my avocado toast. You get the joke, right? I want my avocado toast that gets flown away from so many poor people were hurt in that process of harvesting those avocados.
We are told that we can consume our way out of our problems or reason our way out of our problems, when these are fundamentally issues of morality, which is the whole point, is that if modernity is the structural abandonment of morality, we will not be able to get out of these issues without reintroducing morality structurally into the way that we think and make decisions, which is the transition to the alternative that Islam offers. Yes. And Islam, we have an extremely important imperative where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, warned us about following in the footsteps of other people, that we are not supposed to just go with the flow and be like everybody else. And he told us that we would follow the people or the way of the people before us step by step, even if they jumped into a lizard hole, right? So the modern world, with its disposable, genocidal, ecocidal culture, if that's not a lizard hole, I don't know what a lizard hole is. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects better of us and asks us to be different and asks us to find a way out, not just for our individual selves, but actually also to redeem society. And if there is one group of people that exist on the face of this earth today that can actually help society find its way out of this, then it should be the Muslims. It should be the Muslims should be on the forefront of this. And it starts, as we said, with reintroducing morality in a structural way. This is not an issue of reason. It's not an issue of raising awareness. Why do you think secular environmentalism is so toothless? Why do you think even such a simple thing as global warming, right, is doomed to fail? Secular environmentalism is doomed to fail because it is secular and it doesn't make it into a moral issue. It attempts to make it into an issue of, well, the earth is warming. Then you've got this stone head over here that says, no, it's not, right? Or you've got other people saying, well, yes, it's warming, but this is part of a larger cycle, etc. You set yourself up to fail in that argument, because the Prophet ﷺ told us that if you had a sapling in your palm and the day of judgment was happening, going down right now, that you plant that sapling. That is a moral imperative. That is not a results-based consequentialist imperative. The logic of that statement is not, well, plant the seed if it's going to grow into a tree and you benefit from it. That's the logic of framing it as global warming. As if to say, if the globe wasn't warming, it wouldn't be a problem. You understand the difference, right? That's a huge difference. That's a consequentialist difference, that people are framing the environmental issues in a materialistic way. Okay? If the climate wasn't changing, it wouldn't be a problem. We could still dispose of all of our crap and, send it to Malaysia and whatever. No. Islam says, no, you have to do the thing based off of principle. It's a choice that you make. It's either a right choice or a wrong choice. Okay? And so that's the level of intervention that we need to introduce into these things when we're being intentional and we are reuniting, right, morality in a structural way with society.
And that is the function disposition of a Muslim in everything, right? We are not concerned with the results. We're concerned with doing the right thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us. That's what we do, right? Allah has not obligated you, me, or any one of us to make sure that the results come, right? As long as we follow the doctrine and the moral code that has been laid out, and that's why individually everybody works on that same moral code, but then collectively there's a huge impact, right? Because everyone is trying to do their best according to the unified moral code, and nobody's concerned about the result, because results is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So if you were to apply Islam in a structural way, then you would find that all of these problems that modernity has fallen into would be resolved and solved. We would have not just the reunification of morality in a structural way with our decision making, but even the way that we can consider or conceive of resources and their distribution would be completely changed. Okay, we would not relate to our resources in a way of competition or accumulation or greed. We would rather follow the imperative that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put out in the Quran when He first described our creation to the angels, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. That's a job description. That's not a descriptive statement, it's a normative statement. You understand philosophy, you understand the difference between those two things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have said, hey angels, I'm going to put human beings on earth. I'm going to put bashar. I'm going to put nas. I'm going to put insan. He didn't say that. He said, Inni ja'ilun fil ard khalifa. He said, I'm going to put on earth a successor. Somebody who's a steward. Somebody who's going to take care of things the way that I want them to be taken care of. That's a job description. That's an aspiration. And so now every single one of us has this duty. That's our primary mode of relating to the entire creation as Khalifa. And the Prophet ﷺ said, كُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Right? Every single one of you is a shepherd. Every single one of you is responsible for the flock that you are responsible for. So this is our entire disposition. When it comes to the consumption of resources, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Izhad fi dunya yuhibbuka Allah, wazhad fi ma 'inda an-nas yuhibbuka an-nas." Is that our standard is taking only what we need. The Prophet ﷺ said in this hadith, he says, if you refrain and abstain from the world, Allah is going to love you. And if you refrain and abstain from what belongs to other people are going to love you too. And the Prophet ﷺ said that we are an ummah that doesn't eat until we're hungry and stops eating before we're full. All these people that say, Imam Tom, how are you so skinny? I said, first of all, alhamdulillah, that's from Allah. Second of all, I try to live by this hadith as much as possible, right? It's very simple. Take only what you need. Another hadith you guys probably know, when the Prophet ﷺ said, be like the birds. If you were to rely upon Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, haqqa tawakkul, right? In the proper amount of relying upon Allah, you would be like the birds. You would leave your homes with nothing. No fridge, no savings, no whatever. You'd go out in the dunya, you'd take what you need, Allah would provide for you, and you return to your nest with your bellies full. That is a paradigm upon which to engage in the resources of earth, okay? And not to look at them as the European Enlightenment looked at them as brute, dumb, innate matter, but rather things that the rocks would give salam to the Prophet ﷺ and the trees would weep over him. Very, very different metaphysics than the ones that we've inherited from European Enlightenment. That's called solidarity. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit on zuhud when you're done with that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean,
because that's. I mean, you just skimmed that hadith.
What's it command in this? Yeah, it's about refraining and taking little from the dunya, taking very, very little from the dunya. This is not your home. Your home is in the afterlife. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, if you refrain and take little from what's in the earth, Allah is going to love you. And if you refrain and take little from what belongs to other people, then the people will love you too. And everybody knows this, right? Because sometimes you invite somebody over your house, right? Especially when you're college age and you're a guy, right? They come to your crib, they come to your room, they start going through your cupboards and your fridge. Hey, what else you got? What else you got, homie? Right? Nobody likes that guy. Don't be that guy. Okay? This is in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, right? وَزْهَدْ فِي مَا عِنْدَ النَّاسِ يُحِبُّكَ النَّاسِ. If you are very, very light on what belongs to other people are going to love you. Allah expects you to be that way when it comes to everything. Okay? How much do you really need? Abu Bakr had 2 pairs of clothing. He had 2 pairs of clothing. None of us do that. All of us are guilty, right? We're all guilty. They were different. But this is, they understood what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for us and how to interact with this creation. Is that to be ready to go at any time and to be light on the creation. We have this idea of a carbon footprint, right? If we think about a resource footprint that we have, it's extremely, extremely
so
heavy.
80% of what we own most of the time we don't use, right? That's like a study on that. Like 80% of what we have, we don't touch it, right? And then many times we don't touch those things because we have like some form of emotional attachment. And then you have all of these minimalism and all that new trend that is coming around is like, oh, we got to live minimalism and stuff. And yet, like, you know, if you look at true zuhud, right? One of my teachers, he said it so beautifully. He said, it's not about dunya. It's like if you remove the love of dunya from your heart, right? Dunya is yours for taking because it's no longer in your heart and it's in your hand, right? So it's not about having, if you have a good car or something, it's about that car taking a hold on your heart. It's about like my neighbor who gets out and, you know, and he's got this Harley and the guy's like making sure that there's no blemish on that chrome rim of his on a Sunday with like 30, like it's like, well, I'm still in Fahrenheit, Celsius, so it's 32 Celsius, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, 95 or 98. And he's like sweating and he's just concerned about that blemish on his chrome tire. It's about those things. So it's about abundance of that, but not allowing those things to hold on to us and to like, so, you know, that shoe of ours or that pair of clothing of ours is not occupying our brain. And it's not dragging us down. And that's what's happening with a lot of us today too, right?
And when you have that relationship to things, then you actually are freed up in order to be the type of generous that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects you to be. And to have the type of solidarity with the rest of Allah's creation that He expects you to have, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises people who prefer others to themselves, right? وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. They prefer others to themselves, as he described, subhanahu wa ta'ala, described the Ansar of Medina, even if they themselves are in hardship, right? And so, I mean, we want to get to questions, but I mean, Islam offers the way out when it comes to all of the excesses and fundamental mistakes of modernity, when it comes to the way in which we even conceive about the natural world, let alone interact with it, let alone consume in it, when it comes to sort of the social fracturing of the family, right? We have well-known guidance that you guys know, not saying even uff to your parents, saying salam, prioritizing the elders with salam. Spouses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes spouses in such a beautiful way, litaskunu, right? So that you get
Find sukoon,
that you get tranquility, right? We're supposed to seek out tranquility in our spouses, not have this sort of antagonism where we're rooting for the other to fail, or like red pill, we feel like we have to dominate, and it's evolutionary biology, and we have to sort of outwit and trick the other one, right? This is nonsense. It's all nonsense. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a better way. And finally, of course, when it comes to the natural earth, right? The Khalifa paradigm is what all of us have to strive for. We have to abide by, there's actually a beautiful promise to show you how much the rest of the world is waiting on the Muslims and how much the rest of the world is hoping that the Muslims step up. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّ الْعَالِمْ يَسْتَغْفِرُ لَهُ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَتَّى الْحِيتَانِ فِي الْبَحْرِ, is that for the person who understands the deen, every single thing in creation asks Allah to forgive that person, even the fish in the sea. And the different scholars who explain this hadith, they say because somebody who understands Islam, like actually understands Islam, doesn't mean they necessarily have to be a scholar, but understands Islam, they're going to interact with the world the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to interact. You're going to be that Khalifa. You're going to take care of everything. You're going to, whether it's something as simple as turning the lights off, or turning the faucet off, or having one less outfit, or driving less, or carpooling more, or whatever, or making major decisions in your life. Making major decisions in your life based off of principle, not because this is what's popular, not because this is what everybody else is doing, not because this is the sense of self-worth that has been sold to you since you were in public school, but because this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for you. And this is the best way forward.
even when no one's looking,
Even when no one is looking.
and even if you can't put it on Instagram.
Especially if you can't put it on Instagram.